The Kansas City Chiefs had a pretty disappointing end to an otherwise pretty good 2020 season. Now, they do have some big decisions to make in this upcoming offseason, and in today's video, let's talk about what's next for this team and what they should do in the offseason. But before we do get started, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed, as it really helps out the channel. Also, subscribe if you guys are new, and enjoy the content on here so you do not miss out on any new videos. Plus, we're on the road to 500 subscribers, and once we hit our goal, I will do a reaction to my first 2 videos ever, and a Q&A. And for the shoutouts, from now on, I'm going to be linking my YouTube, friends and like the biggest supporters, of my channel. I'm going to link their channels in the description below. So go ahead and make sure to check them out. But with that being said, let's get this video started. And I want to start out by talking about the Chiefs roster. And Patrick Mahomes is the first player I want to talk about. And I don't really have much else to say about him, besides the fact that he's the best quarterback in the NFL, and I think we all know how good of a player he is. I mean, he's arguably the best player in football. This past year, he had 4,740 passing yards, 38 passing touchdowns, and completed 66% of his passes. Clyde Hilaire is the next player I want to talk about. And Clyde Hilaire, my god, that name is long, but anyways, Clyde, I mean, he had a pretty good rookie year. And I mean, keep in mind, the guy was in a very pass-heavy offense, so he didn't get the most amount of carries, but he had a pretty decent year with 803 yards, 4 touchdowns, and averaged 4 yards a carry. Up next, I want to talk about Tyreek Hill, who had a really good season. That's really what I want to say. He had a really good season and is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, as he is an amazing deep threat and is just an amazing receiver. He had 1,276 receiving yards and 15 touchdowns this past year. Nicole Hardman is the next player I want to talk about. And Nicole Hardman, he had a pretty, I'd say, decent, like an alright year, but he didn't exactly take a massive leap in his game like many of us expected to, and that included me. But he's still a pretty good player, and he could definitely break out next year, as he had 560 yards and 4 touchdowns this past season. Up next, let's talk about Travis Kelsey. Travis Kelsey, I mean, he is arguably the best tight end in the NFL, who broke the record for the most receiving yards in a season by a tight end, and is just amazing. He had 1,416 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball, I want to talk about Chris Jones. And Chris Jones, I mean, he is one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL and is a very big part of this defense. He had 7.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 44 pressures this past year. Frank Clark is the next player I want to talk about. And Frank Clark, I mean, I wouldn't say he's been as good as he was in Seattle, but he's still a pretty big part of this defense and is a very good player. He had 6 sacks and 25 pressures this past season. Up next, let's talk about Charvarius Ward. Well, Charvarius Ward, I guess. Yeah, Charvarius Ward. I mean, the guy, he had a pretty decent year, I would say, and he has a lot of potential for this team. This past year, he had 6 passes defended, and when he targeted, he had a low completion percentage. L'Jarius Sneed is the next player I want to talk about, and L'Jarius Sneed, he had a really good season for the Chiefs. Now, he only played 9 games, but he was really good in those games with 3 interceptions and 7 passes defended. Up next, let's talk about Bashad Brilen. Bashad Brilen, I wouldn't say is an absolutely awesome and amazing corner, but he's still a pretty, I'd say, good and decent player, and he had 2 interceptions and 9 passes defended this past year. And to wrap up this roster, Tyron Matthew is the next and final player I want to talk about. And this past year, I mean, he was just amazing. He is one of the best safeties in the NFL and just had an amazing year with 6 interceptions and 9 passes defended. Now, the Chiefs, as I said before, they have a good roster, and that really goes without saying. However, they still do have their issues, as I said before. The biggest questions really this offseason easily come with upgrading the defense, plus they have to address the offensive line with the cuts of Mitchell Schwartz and Eric Fisher. They also do need to find a good number 2 receiver. Right now, they do have $13 million in cap space, which really isn't, like, amazing, but it's still an alright amount. But they can clear up money. If they were to restructure Frank Clark and Chris Jones, plus if they cut Anthony Hitchens, they could get $24 million in cap space, which is actually pretty decent. Aside from the offensive line and the defense, and the number 2 receiver, those are really the issues they really have to focus on in this offseason. But if you ask me, I think they should mainly focus on the offensive line and defense. Bashad Brilen and Mike Remmers, yeah, I mean, the Super Bowl curse, he does have that, but aside from that, he's actually a pretty decent player. And Alex Ryder, they will all be free agents. That is not exactly, great, but I don't think any of them will cost a bank's worth of money, so they should definitely have some money left over to spend, if they were to bring back, all of these guys. Now, we don't know if they will bring back Bashad, Mike, and Alex, but if they can bring back 1 or 2 of these guys, that would be pretty good. But getting to the free agent targets list, Trent Williams would be nice. I mean, I don't know if the Chiefs will get him, though, given the fact that he will probably cost quite a bit of money. Russell Okung would also be pretty good, as the guy should be decently cheap and is also a very decent player. Kendall Lamb was pretty good for the Browns in the snaps in which he did play, and maybe the guy could be potentially be a starter for this team. Calvin Beachum was also really good for the Cardinals, and I do think he would be, he could be a pretty decent signing if they could get him. Riley Reef is also pretty good for the Vikings, and while the guy is aging, I mean, he would be pretty nice for them. Gabe Jackson was also cut by the Raiders, and he wouldn't be bad either. And Austin Blythe was very good for the Rams, and I mean, he would also be a pretty good player for them, who can play guard and center. And so that's really all I have to say, for some offensive line, free agent targets. Now, getting to the number 2 receivers, Marvin Jones was very underrated for the Lions and has been for the past few years. And if you ask me, he would be, he'd be pretty good on this team. Emmanuel Sanders, while the guy is aging, he's still a pretty good player. And if you ask me, he'd be a pretty good target for the Chiefs. And John Brown was recently cut by the Bills, and I do think at this point in his career he would probably like another, his very first ring. And I do think Kansas City would be a pretty good place. The guy is a very good deep threat, and if he can maintain, if he can still be very good for them and be a good number 2 receiver, then I do think John Brown would be pretty good in this offense and could also get his first ring potentially with that. And to help improve the front 7, Melvin Ingram would be pretty good, and so could Olivier Vernon, and so could Carlos Dunlap to help improve this, defense. But aside from that, that's really all I have to say. Free agency, they should really just focus on addressing the offensive line, which to me is probably going to be the biggest, plus improve that defense, especially the pass rush, as outside of Chris Jones and Frank Clark, they are not exactly great when it comes to rushing the quarterback. And they should also try and find a number 2 receiver, if it's possible. Plus, they should definitely do what they can to bring back their important free agents. But aside from that, they will also own the 31st pick in the draft to, help address any weaknesses on their roster. And while they probably won't get any of the top prospects unless they were to trade up or something weird just happened, they should definitely use that pick to help improve that team. And some draft targets could be someone like Sam Cosmi to help improve the offensive line, Zaven Collins if they want to improve the defense, and Nick Bolton could also be a pretty good linebacker for this team. Jalen Phillips would also be a pretty good edge rusher if they do, again, want to improve the defense, and same with Jason Owe. So, those are some draft targets I do have, and Wyatt Davis could also be potentially good for this team if they were to help, if they were to go ahead and improve the offensive line. But they can possibly get him in the second round. Maybe they trade up, but yeah, those are my draft targets for this team. But aside from that, to wrap up this video, the Chiefs do have a really good team. I still expect them to be great next year, but they do have some holes to fill this offseason. And if they can fill them, I have no doubt in my mind they can win their second Super Bowl in 3 years. But with that being said, that'll wrap up today's video. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to hit that like button, as it really helps out the channel. Subscribe if you guys are new, and enjoy the content on here so you do not miss out on any new videos. Plus, we're on the road to 500 subscribers, and once we hit our goal, I'll do a reaction to my first 2 videos ever and a Q&A. Also, go ahead and check out some of my YouTube friends. The link to their channels are in the description below. And with that being said, I'm out, you guys.